In this video, I'm going to teach you about the ego and how to do ego work. So I learned this from a psychologist on YouTube, and I thought it was a great idea to share it on my channel because I talk a lot about the ego and the higher self, and I think it's beneficial for all of us to actually take the time to do ego work. So the key really is to heal the ego. We don't want to kill the ego because we actually need to have an ego. It's part of the human experience. But we just need to heal the ego. So firstly, let's look at what the ego is. The ego is part of the self-identity that has been internalized based on past life experiences. So this generally stems from childhood. And so, for example, you may have been a little kid that was really excited over some type of hobby, like let's say it was artwork, and you've done this really cool picture and you're so excited and glowing, and you go to show like a parent or a caregiver, and they responded in a negative way. They may have told you to shh, your father's asleep. And so that teaches you to now hold back and not be so excited about things. So this is why it's really good to take that time to do ego work, but to also revisit our childhood and the way we were treated, our childhood wounds, the things that were said to us that helped to shape our ego. So realize though, the ego's job is to protect you. Okay, so it's kind of like a survival thing, and it's to keep you safe. That's all the ego wants to do. It just wants to keep you safe. So again, we don't want to kill the ego. We need the ego. It's important to have one as part of our human experience. We just need to work with our ego to heal it. And so the analogy I use with the ego is like the ego's job is it's designed to keep you safe, but it's like your negative way of thinking. So the analogy is, you imagine back in the day when you had to go hunting for your own meat, and you're out hunting and you're like, oh, I've got to be careful. There might be a lion out here that's going to want to eat me. See, it's negative thinking, but it's designed to keep you safe. So that is the job of the ego. It's important that we have one. We need one. Okay, so let's look at ego work, right? So ego work is the practice of observing ego as separate from authentic self. So the ego, which is the mind, is the false self. And the true self is the soul. The soul's in the body. This is where your heart and your gut is, right? So the soul's in the body, your ego's the mind. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to observe the ego as separate from our authentic self. So how do we begin? Firstly, you want to name your ego. You give your ego a name to be able to separate it from yourself. So my name I gave to my ego was Erica. I decided to call her Erica the ego. And so whenever you have that self-awareness where you can see that your ego may be telling you some sort of story, or your ego's being activated and triggered, you can be like, oh, that's Erica. Erica's playing up at the moment, or Erica's telling me some story at the moment. So that's the first thing you want to do, is give it that name so you can separate it from yourself. Now, the next one is my ego is telling me a story that blank. So the story we'll use is one of the most common stories that we tell ourselves, and that is, I'm not good enough. My thoughts or ideas or work, it's not good enough, right? So that's the story that the ego is telling ourselves. Then we have, when I believe this story, I react by. So you could react by procrastination. You could react by comparisons. You're comparing yourself to other people and seeing yourself as less than compared to them. You could also react by not putting your truth out. You might hold yourself back and be a bit more withdrawn. So the next one down here is, when I release this story, I can make a choice too. And that can be to not procrastinate, to not compare myself, to speak my truth instead of holding back. Okay? So it's really good just to sit down and to go through this, because our ego is always telling ourselves all sorts of stories. And so you need to realize this is a long process. It's not an overnight thing. You don't just sit down once, write one story, and then boom, your ego's healed. It's something you got to work at. And again, we tell ourselves so many stories. The three most common stories that the ego tells us is, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, or there's something wrong with me. They're the most common ones that like pretty much everyone's walking around, carrying around with them, right? So I highly recommend giving this a go. Now, there is a candle meditation I highly recommend doing as well, where you simply just light a candle, you stare at the candle flame, because when you stare at a candle flame, it helps to quieten down the mind. They say eyes that wander is a mind that wanders. So when you stare at the candle flame, it helps to just quieten down the mind. And what you do is you observe your thoughts or observe the stories that your ego is telling you. So you observe that. It doesn't matter if they're positive or negative thoughts, okay? It's not about controlling your thoughts. It's simply observing. So you imagine yourself sitting on a park bench and you're just watching the thoughts go past and just observing them. So the reason I say to do this is because, you know, our ego is always telling us all sorts of stories, and sometimes these stories we can be unaware of them. They can be on the subconscious level, so we don't actually know we're telling ourselves these stories. So when you take the time, like I recommend doing it every day for about 5 to 10 minutes, where you're just observing that candle and observing your thought patterns, and you'll start to be able to observe what stories your ego is telling you. So that's another great way to do this sort of work. It'll help you figure out what to fill in with these blanks, and it'll help you to heal that ego. Now, if you would like to know how to tell if you are healing your ego, I'm going to drop a video right here that's called 8 Signs You Are Healing Your Ego. And if you like this sort of content, then subscribe and hit the bell notification. If you got some sort of value out of this content, give me a thumbs up or write a comment. Hope you have an awesome day. Hope I see you on the next video. Peace.